Welcome, warrior, to tonight's journey through the Viking Age. But before we begin, imagine yourself waking in the harsh yet beautiful land of the Vikings. The sun barely rises, and the cold air stings as you step outside. You're a Viking, warrior hardened by years of training. But tonight, we're not only going to tell the tales of raids and battles. No, tonight, we're going deeper. We'll discover what it really meant to live as a Viking warrior, not just the violence and conquest, but the daily routines, the training, and the quiet moments that shaped these fierce warriors. You'll experience the journey from the day a Viking child begins their training to the warrior they become, and how they balance their notorious reputation with family, love, and the community they built. This isn't just about the Viking raids that have echoed through history, but the very life of a warrior, both on the battlefield and at home. So, as you settle in tonight, close your eyes and imagine yourself standing in the shadows of a Viking. How did they prepare for battle, and what did their world really look like when they weren't fighting? Before we dive into this epic journey, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see where people are joining from, so let me know. Also, I have another question for you. If you were a Viking warrior, what would your weapon of choice be, and why? Would you wield an axe, a sword, or something else entirely? Let's begin this journey together, where we explore the life of a Viking warriors, strong, loyal, and ever prepared for whatever challenges their world presented. Welcome to the heart of the Viking world. Tonight, we step into the boots of a Viking warrior, not just the fearsome fighter you might have heard about in the sagas, but the man or woman who was shaped by their world from birth, taught to endure, survive, and fight for a cause much larger than themselves. To understand the Viking warrior, we must first understand where it all began: their early lives, their training, and the harsh environment that demanded they be both physically strong and mentally resilient. The world of the Vikings was unforgiving, situated in the far north of Europe. The Scandinavian countries were shaped by a harsh climate, long winters, and landscapes that ranged from dense forests to barren fjords. Life was not easy, and survival meant constantly fighting against the forces of nature. Yet, from this unforgiving land arose some of the most formidable warriors in history. The life of a Viking warrior was a journey one that began long before the first sword was swung in battle. Let's begin our journey where it all started: the childhood of a Viking warrior. From the moment they were born, Viking children were raised with a sense of purpose. Life was harsh, and weakness was not tolerated. Every boy and girl born in a Viking village knew from a young age that survival depended on their ability to endure. Viking society did not offer the luxury of carelessness. It was a world where strength, wisdom, and resilience were essential. And every child was expected to learn these qualities as soon as they could walk and talk. In the early years, life was centered around the hearth. Viking children learned from their parents, who not only raised them, but also taught them practical skills for survival. The first lessons were simple, yet vital. Children learned how to chop wood, mend tools, and assist with the farming. They learned how to care for the livestock, fish in the cold rivers, and work with leather and wool to make clothes. But it wasn't just about survival skills. The Vikings believed that the mind needed to be as sharp as the sword. From an early age, children were told stories of their ancestors, of gods, and of heroes. These stories were passed down from generation to generation, and they formed the backbone of Viking education. The sagas were not just tales, they were moral guides, teaching children the importance of bravery, honor, and loyalty. By the age of 6 or 7, Viking boys and girls began to practice their skills with mock weapons, wooden swords, shields, and spears. These early lessons were playful, yet they were foundational. A Viking child wasn't just learning how to defend themselves, but how to move, think, and react under pressure. The idea was not to simply fight, but to outsmart, to strike with precision and speed, while girls learned the domestic art spinning wool. Making clothes and managing the homeboys were groomed for something more. They were expected to be warriors, and this expectation influenced every aspect of their upbringing. Though both boys and girls were raised to work hard, the boy's path often took him toward battle, exploration, and leadership. But it wasn't just about swordplay. From a very young age, the Viking child was expected to understand the importance of loyalty. Honor was paramount in Viking society, and from the first days of training, they learned that a warrior's reputation was everything. The Vikings believed in the concept of hamingja, or personal luck and reputation, which could be passed down from generation to generation. A warrior's success in battle wasn't just a reflection of their own strength. It was a reflection of the strength of their ancestors and their family's honor. As the years passed and Viking children entered their teenage years, the training intensified. By the age of 12, most Viking boys were considered capable of becoming full-fledged warriors. But becoming a warrior was not a simple matter of picking up a sword. It was a process that took years of preparation. The next phase of their life would be spent learning the intricacies of battle the weapons, the strategies, and the mindset of a warrior. Viking training began with the basics. The most iconic weapon of the Viking warrior was the axe, but they also mastered the sword, the spear, and the shield. The axe was practically used for chopping wood, but also for fighting. As a result, Viking warriors trained extensively with axes, learning how to wield them effectively in battle. The shield was just as essential. It was both a weapon and a defense. A Viking warrior learned to wield their shield like an extension of their body, using it to deflect blows and counterattack. The training wasn't just about mastering the property. Weapons, it was about becoming adaptable and swift in combat. A Viking warrior had to be agile, able to adjust to changing circumstances on the battlefield. They practiced both offensive and defensive strategies, learning how to fight in groups, how to read the flow of a battle, and how to find the best position for a quick strike. Battle tactics were ingrained through repetition, and the warriors' body became conditioned to respond instinctively to combat situations in addition to their weaponry skills. Vikings were also trained in endurance. They learned to swim in freezing rivers, to run long distances over rugged terrain, and to march for hours while carrying heavy equipment. Endurance was key to their success, as many Viking raids were prolonged and required warriors to endure weeks or even months at sea and on foreign shores. Physical conditioning was as important as any weapons skill. After all, the strength to endure hunger, exhaustion, and cold was what often made the difference between life and death. Vikings also learned how to use their ships, the longships that would carry them across the seas to distant lands. These ships were marvels of design, able to glide through both shallow and deep waters. As part of their training, Viking warriors learned how to sail, navigate, and fight from these ships. They would practice jumping on and off the ships, preparing to raid coastal villages or storm fortresses. Every movement was planned for efficiency, for speed, and for the ferocity that would strike fear into their enemies. The longship was also a symbol of Viking strength. The warriors trained in unison, their oars pulling in perfect harmony, synchronized with the rhythm of battle. The Vikings' connection to their ships was inseparable. Their ships were their homes, their weapons, and their vehicles of conquest. The time would come when the young Viking warriors were no longer mere apprentices. The raids would call to them, and it was their first real taste of battle. But this transition from a boy to a full-fledged warrior wasn't immediate. They would first accompany their fathers or elders on raids, not always to fight, but to learn through observation and small tasks. These early raids served as the ultimate test. The young warrior had to prove themselves worthy of their place in battle. When a Viking warrior finally set foot on a battlefield, it was unlike anything they had experienced before. It's a brutality, of combat, the chaos and the confusion could overwhelm even the most well-trained young man. But this was where all the training came into play, every practice with the sword. Every lesson in endurance, every moment spent learning strategy was now put to the test. Their first battle was a rite of passage, a test of courage, strength, and survival. For some, it would be the most terrifying moment of their lives. For others, it would be the moment they truly became a Viking. They fought alongside experienced warriors, learning how to strike with precision, how to defend with strength, and how to work as a team. It wasn't just about victory, it was about proving themselves, about earning their place in the tribe's legacy. The raids were brutal and unforgiving. The young warriors learned that war was not a glamorous affair, it was bloodshed, hardship, and danger. Yet, it was also a defining moment. The Viking warrior's identity was tied to the success or failure of these raids. They returned home with their spoils, not just with riches, but with the honor of their community. A successful raid meant wealth, fame, and a reputation that would last for generations. The Viking warrior's role was not just to fight, it was to protect and build. While they were feared for their prowess in battle, they were also revered for their role in shaping their world. They were leaders, builders, traders, and explorers. A Viking warrior's life was deeply intertwined with the survival of their people. They were expected to be more than just soldiers. They were fathers, sons, and brothers. Their identity was shaped not just by their sword, but by the legacy they left behind in their homes and villages at home. They were tasked with providing for their families. The winters were long, and the farming and crafting were essential to sustaining their communities. When not at war, a Viking warrior might be found working on the farm, building ships, crafting weapons, or trading goods with neighboring tribes. These tasks were just as important as any battle, but the most important responsibility of a Viking warrior was to ensure the future of their people. They fought not just for land and riches, but for the survival of their community and the legacy they would leave behind. The warrior's role was not just to fight, was to protect and guide their family, their village, and their people. As the Viking warrior began their journey into adulthood, they were no longer simply the apprentice or the young man learning the ways of battle. They had grown into full warriors, battle-tested, disciplined, and ready to take their place among the fierce and respected. However, the life of a Viking warrior was not one defined solely by their sword or their shield. The warriors of the North were a unique breed, and their lives were shaped by a deep balance between their violent conquests and the quieter, everyday routines of home and community. It is this balance that defined their legacy in this segment. We will explore the life of the Viking warrior beyond the battlefield. We will journey with them through their day-to-day routines, tending to their homes, working with their families, and reflecting on the duties that came with being part of a close-knit yet fierce society. Though their reputation might have been built on their skill in battle, a true Viking strength came not just from their prowess in war, but from the ability to thrive in every aspect of life. The Viking longhouse was the heart of a warrior's home, a place where families gathered around the warmth of the hearth, where food was prepared, stories were told, and life carried on in between the brutal battles. The longhouse was not simply a shelter. It was the center of Viking life, and within it, warriors lived and interacted with their families and fellow villagers. A Viking warrior would spend a significant portion of his life maintaining his home and farm, ensuring that his family was fed and secure. The longhouse, with its wooden beams and thatched roof, was designed to keep out the cold and provide shelter through the long winters. Inside, the walls were decorated with tapestries, shields, and trophies of battles fought, symbolizing not only their warrior status, but also their connection to the gods and their ancestors. Viking warriors often lived in close proximity to their families. This wasn't just about domestic duty, was about creating a strong unit that could endure both the hardships of war and the challenges of daily life. The role of the warrior was not just to fight, it was to protect, to provide, and to lead. In this home, the wife was equally important. She kept the household running smoothly, caring for the children, preparing food, and managing the farm. The balance of responsibilities was essential. The warrior's strength on the battlefield was matched by the strength of the woman who ensured that their home thrived. Viking women played an integral role in maintaining the day-to-day functioning of the household. While the men were away on raids, it was the women who held the fort, so to speak. They managed livestock, grew crops, and ensured the household remained in working order. While these women might not have been warriors in the traditional sense, they were just as resilient, facing the everyday challenges of Viking life with determination and toughness. Their roles allowed the warrior to be free to explore raids and fight without the constant worry of the well-being of his family. When a Viking warrior returned from battle or a long raid, the homecoming was both a moment of relief and celebration. The reunion with his family was one of the highlights of his life. Returning to the hearth, he would take part in the nightly ritual feasting with his family and community. The table would be laden with meats from the hunt, freshly baked bread, and hearty stews made from preserved vegetables and salted meats. This was the time for shared stories, laughter, and reflection. The Viking family had endured, and the warrior could rest, even if for only a short time, knowing his family was secure. Though the Viking warrior's life was undeniably intertwined with battle and conquest, much of his success also depended on trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. The Vikings were not just raiders, they were traders, explorers, and farmers. Their longships allowed them to travel to distant lands, from the coasts of modern-day England to the Byzantine Empire. But the Vikings didn't just take, they also gave. Trade was essential to their survival, and it allowed them to accumulate wealth, forge alliances, and build connections across Europe. Viking farmers would spend much of their time cultivating crops, tending to animals, and making the most of their limited resources. The harsh climate of Scandinavia meant that every effort had to be maximized. These farmers were not just working the land, they were working to ensure that their communities thrived, especially during the long winters when the seas were too treacherous to navigate. Crops were harvested in the summer months and stored for the cold seasons ahead, with Vikings relying heavily on their ability to preserve food. Salted fish, dried meats, and pickled vegetables were vital parts of their diet during the winter months. The Viking warrior's connection to the land was not just symbolic, it was practical. Whether he was gathering wood, helping with the harvest, or making sure the livestock were cared for, the warrior's responsibilities extended far beyond the battlefield. During the harshest months of winter, when raiding and exploring were impossible, the warrior's strength was needed in the village. It was during these months that his leadership in agriculture, his work ethic, and his practical skills were of utmost importance. The Viking warrior's strength was born not only of battle, but of constant training. Their bodies were sculpted through discipline, repetition, and a relentless desire to improve. The cold land and harsh environment were their gym, and survival itself was their exercise. Training for battle was integral to the life of a Viking. It wasn't just about mastering a weapon, it was about building endurance, agility, and mental focus. A Viking warrior's fitness extended beyond physical strength. They were trained to endure long marches, cold swims, and hours of combat. Physical conditioning was relentless and was balanced by intense mental preparation. A warrior needed to be able to act decisively, think quickly, and lead his comrades without hesitation. Warriors often trained together in the fields, sparring with wooden swords or axes, learning how to strike, parry, and defend in the most efficient way possible. The Vikings were known for their berserkers, elite warriors who fought with a seemingly supernatural fury. These berserkers were trained to fight with unyielding aggression to work themselves into a trance-like state where fear was no longer an obstacle. They were both feared and revered for their ferocity, while the berserkers were elite warriors. The standard Viking warrior was just as formidable. His training was relentless, not only for battle, but also for survival. A Viking warrior's ability to endure hardship was as much a part of his identity as his sword. The physical demands were unrelenting, yet each warrior learned to push through pain, fatigue, and fear. One of the most important aspects of the Viking warrior's life was his shield. The shield was not just a tool of defense, it was a symbol of his identity, his status, and his place in society. The shield was a warrior's first line of defense, and it played an integral role in the formation of Viking battle strategies. Viking shields were round, typically made of wood and reinforced, with iron or steel at the center. These shields were not only used for protection, they were used for offense as well. A skilled Viking warrior could wield his shield as a weapon, knocking opponents off balance or deflecting blows before striking back with an axe or sword. The shield also had a more profound meaning for the Viking warrior. It was a personal symbol, often decorated with intricate designs that represented the warrior's family, his achievements, or the gods he worshipped. Shields were personalized and were sometimes passed down from one generation to the next, making them not just tools of war, but symbols of a legacy. When the Vikings set off to battle, their shields were as much a part of them as their swords. In a raid, each warrior would form a shield wall, a tight formation that allowed them to protect one another and advance as a unit. It was a tactic that allowed the Viking warrior to fight alongside his brothers, each protecting the other as they moved forward. The Viking warrior's life was ultimately defined by one thing: their legacy. The Vikings believed in the importance of honor and reputation. A warrior's deeds in battle, the way they fought, the way they lived, and how they treated their family and community, these would all shape their legacy. A Viking warrior did not fight for wealth alone. They fought to secure their place in the sagas. These were the stories that would live on long after they had passed. Viking warriors understood that death was a part of life. It was an inevitable end, but how a warrior met that end was of the utmost importance. The Vikings believed that dying in battle was the highest honor, as it meant they would be chosen by Odin, the Allfather, to live forever in Valhalla. This belief shaped everything they did, from the way they fought to the way they lived. 2. Die bravely. Fighting for their people and their gods was the ultimate goal. The Vikings did not shy away from death. They embraced it as part of their path. Their warrior's legacy was passed down through the generations, not only in the stories told around the fire, but in the actions they took in life. As we continue our journey into the Viking warrior's world, we step away from the safety of the village and into the realm of conquest, exploration, and war. A Viking warrior's life was not just defined by his family or his daily routines. It was also shaped by his reputation, the way others saw him, and how his deeds in battle marked him for generations to come. But being a Viking warrior was more than just about gaining fame and glory. It was about the emotional and psychological toll of living with a warrior's heart. For the Vikings, battle was not only a physical challenge, it was an integral part of their identity. It was where their courage, loyalty, and strength were tested. A Viking's reputation was forged in blood, but it was also shaped by the loyalty of his comrades, the respect of his enemies, and the legacy he left for his descendants. In this segment, we explore the psychology of the Viking warrior, the pressure to live up to their infamous reputation, and the journey they undertook when they left their villages behind, embarking on raids and exploration. We will also uncover the complexities of their leadership and what made them not just feared warriors, but effective leaders, who held the trust and respect of those who fought alongside them. A Viking warrior's reputation was a matter of immense importance. This reputation wasn't simply about how many battles they had fought in or how many enemies they had slain. It was about their honor, courage, and the way they carried themselves in life and death. It was in battle that a warrior's legacy was truly defined. A Viking warrior did not live in isolation. Their deeds spoke for them, and those deeds were passed down through generations in the sagas. Honor was everything. If a Viking warrior failed in his duty, he showed cowardice or abandoned his comrades, he would be shunned. The fear of dishonor was greater than the fear of death itself. The Vikings believed that a man's honor would follow him into the afterlife. To die without honor was a fate worse than death. The sagas, the epic tales of Vikings, gods, and heroes were filled with stories of warriors who rose to the challenge, earning their place in the halls of Valhalla, where they would feast and fight for eternity. These stories were not just for entertainment, they were moral guides. They taught young Vikings the values they were expected to uphold: courage, loyalty, and strength in the face of adversity. The saga of a Viking warrior's life was built on their victories and defeats. When a Viking returned from a raid, he would be celebrated for his bravery, and his deeds would be sung by the Skald's poets, ensuring that his name and legacy would live on forever. For the Viking, the most coveted prize wasn't gold or treasure writ, was the respect of others and the enduring legacy they left behind. Raids were the centerpiece of a Viking warrior's life. These raids were not just about plunder, they were about proving one's worth as a warrior. But the psychological toll of constant warfare was immense. The fear, the chaos, the brutality, all of it left a lasting impact on the warrior's mind and soul. For many Viking warriors, the call to raid was driven by the need for resources, land, and honor. The raids were also an expression of the Viking belief that their gods demanded action. They believed that they were fighting not only for wealth and survival, but for the favor of their gods. Odin, Thor, and Freya were always watching, and the Vikings believed that their actions in battle would determine whether they were chosen to join the gods in Valhalla. But what did it really feel like to be on a raid? What went through a warrior's mind when he landed on the shores of an enemy village where the screams of the dying filled the air? The psychological weight of battle was heavy, and the violence was not something that could be easily forgotten. For the Viking warrior, war was both a personal pursuit and a communal duty. The honor of the tribe depended on their ability to raid and win. The raid itself was a terrifying, unpredictable experience. A Viking warrior never knew if he would return home to his family or die in a foreign land. The uncertainty of battle brought with it both exhilaration and fear. Yet, the Viking's ability to withstand that fear and fight alongside his brothers in arms was what solidified his place in history. The raids were brutal, and the consequences of failure were dire. A warrior who turned tail and fled was not just a failure, he was dishonored. The mental strain of this constant pressure was immense. Yet, it was this pressure that shaped the Viking warrior into who he was. He didn't fear death, he welcomed it. But it wasn't just death that the Viking warrior feared. It was dishonor, the shame of returning from battle without having proven his worth. And so, each Viking warrior learned to push through the psychological barriers that would hold most men back. They were warriors not just of strength, but of willpower and conviction. Being a Viking warrior was not just about personal strength, it was also about leadership. A successful Viking raid required coordination, discipline, and strategy. A warrior had to be able to inspire loyalty in others and lead his brothers into battle with confidence and clarity. The most respected Viking warriors often rose to positions of leadership. These leaders were not just the strongest, they were the most cunning and capable of making split-second decisions in the heat of battle. Leadership in the Viking world wasn't about titles or formalities, it was about respect earned through action. If a warrior showed bravery, intelligence, and loyalty, he would naturally rise to a position of leadership within his group. In battle, the leader's role was to guide his warriors, make decisions, and protect his people. Leadership meant taking responsibility not only for the warrior's safety, but also for the outcome of the raid. The leader had to be able to make strategic decisions on the fly, choosing which villages to attack, where to send his forces, and when to retreat if necessary. But the warrior leader was not just a commander during battle. He was also a leader in the everyday aspects of Viking life. At home, he was expected to provide for his family, to make decisions that would ensure their survival, and to manage the community's resources. He was the backbone of his village and the protector of his people. A good Viking leader was someone who could balance the ferocity of battle with the wisdom of governance. Viking warriors were not just soldiers, they were also strategists, tacticians, and leaders. Their ability to inspire and guide others was integral to their success. The Viking society valued those who could lead, and the best leaders were those who could balance aggression with wisdom, strength with compassion. In Viking society, the bond between a warrior and his comrades was sacred. The concept of comradeship was not just about fighting together, it was about living together. Viking warriors spent long hours on their ships at sea with nothing but each other for company. They shared their successes and failures, their joys and sorrows. The bond they formed was unlike any other. This sense of brotherhood was what carried them through the most difficult of times. It wasn't just about the individual warrior, it was about the tribe, the group, and the loyalty they had for one another. On a Viking ship, there was no room for hesitation or selfishness. Every warrior depended on the others. If one man faltered, the entire group would suffer. The Vikings believed that their warriors were stronger together than apart. This bond was what made their raids so effective. When a Viking warrior went into battle, he was not just fighting for glory or riches, he was fighting for his comrades, for the honor of his tribe. And when he returned from battle, it wasn't just his honor that was celebrated dead, was the honor of his entire crew. Off the battlefield, the bonds were just as strong. The warrior's relationship with his fellow warriors was a vital part of his life. Whether they were sharing stories around the fire, playing games, or working together on the farm, the sense of brotherhood was ever present. In Viking society, loyalty was not just expected, it was demanded. The Viking warrior's legacy was more than just the battles. He fought it was the stories that were told about him. The sagas were the heart of Viking history, and a warrior's deeds would live on in these stories for generations. The sagas immortalized the warriors, their battles, their victories, and their failures. A warrior's reputation would travel far and wide, carried by the skald's poets who would sing of his bravery, wisdom, and strength. The legacy of a Viking warrior was not just about his lifetime. It was about the impact he had on those who came after him. When a Viking warrior died, his death was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be remembered for generations. The Vikings believed that a warrior's legacy lived on in the sagas, in the children they fathered, and in the communities they built. A Viking warrior's life was defined by more than just the battles they fought. It was shaped by their family, their community, and the stories told in their honor. Their legacy lived on, not just in the bloodshed, but in the culture they created, the values they upheld, and the respect they earned. The Viking warrior's journey was one of immense physical, emotional, and mental challenges. By their training, their battles, their family, and their reputation, the Viking warrior's life was one of constant struggle, but it was also one of unparalleled strength, honor, and loyalty. As we leave behind the hearth and warmth of the Viking longhouse, we venture out into the world of exploration, raids, and encounters with foreign cultures. The Viking warrior was not just a defender of his family or a servant to his tribe. No, the life of a Viking warrior was a constant push into the unknown. A relentless drive to expand the world and push the boundaries of what was possible. Viking raids have long been associated with destruction, bloodshed, and brutality. But the reality of these expeditions was far more complex. The Vikings were not merely raiders, they were explorers, traders, and settlers who shaped the world through their travels and connections. It was in the midst of these violent raids that Viking warriors learned to understand new lands, new peoples, and new ways of life. In this segment, we will focus on the Viking warriors' journey beyond their homeland, exploring the psychological and spiritual aspects of their raids, their interactions with other cultures, and the gods that guided them. We will see how they left their mark on the world not just through bloodshed, but through trade, exploration, and the cultural exchanges that took place when they encountered new civilizations. From the early days of their training, Viking warriors were raised with the understanding that their world was vast far beyond the cold fjords of Scandinavia. The Vikings' relentless spirit of exploration was born from a desire not only to conquer, but to understand the world around them. The sea was their path, and their longships, their most prized possessions, allowed them to journey across vast distances from the icy coasts of the north to the warm shores of the Mediterranean. The Viking longship, with its shallow draft and long, slender design, was a technological marvel. Capable of sailing in shallow rivers and deep seas alike, it allowed Vikings to strike at distant targets and to navigate waterways that would otherwise have been inaccessible. The longship was as much a tool of war as it was a means of exploration, but it also represented the very essence of Viking culture: speed, efficiency. For the Viking warrior, the call to explore was more than a simple desire for land or wealth. It was an intrinsic part of their identity. Whether embarking on a raid or setting out to discover new lands, the warrior knew that to venture out onto the sea was to embrace the unknown. The Vikings believed that the sea was a living, breathing force, a pathway to the gods themselves. The Viking warrior was guided not only by the promise of wealth, but by the belief that their journey was a divine calling, one that would shape their legacy in ways they could not yet understand. As they sailed, the warriors would rely on their knowledge of the stars, the winds, and the currents to guide them across the vast ocean. Navigation was a skill passed down from father to son, learned not just through maps, but through instinct and experience. The warrior who could navigate the seas with skill was respected not only for his strength, but for his wisdom. Vikings didn't just follow the seas, they learned from them, interpreting signs, the patterns of birds, and the shift of winds to guide their ships toward their destination. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. The Viking warrior's journey was fraught with danger. Tempests, unpredictable winds, and rough seas made every voyage a gamble. The warriors learned early that fear of the sea was a luxury they couldn't afford. They had to face every challenge head-on, knowing that the rewards would outweigh the risks. Once the Viking warriors arrived at their destinations, they quickly turned from explorers to invaders. The Viking raids are perhaps the most infamous aspect of their history, and they were pivotal in shaping their reputation. For many of these raids, Vikings targeted the coasts of England, France, and the Low Countries, seeking wealth, land, and slaves. But it wasn't just about plunder. For the Viking warrior, the raid was a complex endeavor, driven by a mixture of necessity, honor, and the quest for legacy. To be successful in a raid was to secure wealth for your people, but it was also a way to secure your place in the sagas, to ensure that your name would live on forever. Raids were violent, chaotic affairs. Vikings would strike suddenly, overwhelming unsuspecting villages with speed and ferocity. The primary weapon of a Viking warrior was the axe, large, sharp, and capable of cleaving through armor and bone. But the Viking warrior was versatile. He would wield swords, spears, and shields, and each warrior was trained to adapt quickly in the midst of battle. Warriors fought side by side, relying on each other's strength and skill to carry the day. If one warrior fell, another would take his place. It was a brotherhood bound by blood and iron. Yet, the Vikings were not merely bloodthirsty raiders. They were also highly strategic. They knew how to make quick strikes, get in and out without overstaying their welcome. Their raids were often fast and efficient, leaving their targets with little time to retaliate. The Vikings didn't just fight for the sake of fighting, they fought to get what they needed and then moved on. But despite the violence and destruction, Viking warriors were not seen as mindless barbarians by all. Their encounters with other cultures, especially with the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, and the Byzantines led to the exchange of ideas, technologies, and even trade. In fact, many Viking warriors became mercenaries, offering their services to foreign kings in exchange for wealth and lands. For the Viking warrior, the journey was as much spiritual as it was physical. Their beliefs in the gods Odin, Thor, Freya, and others shaped every aspect of their life. To be a Viking warrior was to live under the shadow of the gods. These gods were not distant deities. They were real, present, and involved in every part of the warrior's life. The Vikings believed that they were chosen by the gods to fight. Their raids, their battles, and their voyages were not just acts of personal ambition. They were acts of divine will. The Vikings believed that their bravery in battle would be rewarded by Odin, the god of war and wisdom, who would lead them to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. In Valhalla, the warriors would feast and fight until the end of days, awaiting the final battle of Ragnarok before embarking on a raid. Many Vikings would participate in rituals to honor the gods and seek their blessing. These rituals could involve sacrifices, offerings, and prayers to ensure that the gods would favor them in battle. Warriors would sacrifice animals, sometimes even prisoners, believing that their blood would please the gods and grant them victory. These rituals were a way for the Viking warriors to align themselves with the divine forces that they believed guided their lives. For many Vikings, death in battle was not to be feared, was to be embraced. The warrior's ultimate goal was to die with honor in battle, knowing that it would guarantee a place in Valhalla. The psychological impact of this belief cannot be overstated. Viking warriors did not fight for riches alone. They fought for the honor of being chosen by the gods to join their ranks in the afterlife. But there was more to Viking spirituality than the desire for eternal glory. The Vikings also believed in the land spirits, the Landvidr protective beings that inhabited the natural world. These spirits were invoked to bless their land, their homes, and their ships. The Viking warriors' connection to the land was as strong as their connection to their gods. The strength of their ancestors, the land spirits, and the gods, all formed the foundation of the Viking warrior spirit. The Vikings' voyages were not limited to raiding and exploration. They also sought new opportunities for trade and settlement. As they traveled, they encountered a variety of cultures. From the Anglo-Saxons in England to the Moors in Spain to the Byzantines in Constantinople. These encounters were transformative, leading to cultural exchanges that shaped the Vikings' worldview. In Constantinople, Viking warriors known as Varangians served as mercenaries in the Byzantine army. They were highly respected for their fighting prowess and loyalty. Many of them came to settle in the region, learning new skills, forging new alliances, and engaging in trade. In return, the Byzantines offered the Vikings wealth, knowledge, and exposure to new ideas. The cultural exchange between the Vikings and the Byzantines is one of the most fascinating aspects of Viking history. In the East, the Vikings encountered the Rus people, with whom they formed alliances, traded goods, and sometimes even intermarried. The Vikings' journey to the East opened up new routes for trade and connected them with the world beyond Europe. It was through these interactions that the Vikings built a vast network of trade. allowing them to become one of the most powerful and influential peoples of the early medieval period. The Viking warrior was not just a man of battle, he was a man of the world. His travels, raids, and encounters with other cultures shaped not only his identity, but the world itself. The legacy of the Viking warrior is one of conquest and trade, of cultural exchange and exploration. Their journeys extended far beyond their homeland, shaping the course of European and world history. As we reflect on the life of the Viking warrior, we understand that their strength was not just in their swords and axes, was in their courage to venture into the unknown. Their ability to adapt and grow through encounters with other cultures, foes, and their unshakable belief in the gods and the legacy they would leave behind. The Viking warrior's journey did not end the moment the battle cries faded or the longship docked back on home shores. While much of their story is defined by the thrill of battle, the leadership in raids, and the reputation they earned on distant shores, it is in the later years of their life where the true legacy of a Viking warrior is forged. After years of raiding and exploring, the life of a Viking warrior settled into a different rhythm, no longer defined by the wars they fought or the conquests they made. They shifted from fearsome warriors to respected elders, mentors, and family providers. Their life was now a delicate balance between maintaining the legacy of battle and nurturing the generations that would follow. In this segment, we will explore the final stages of the Viking warrior's life, their transition from the battlefield to the hearth, and the powerful impact they had on their families, communities, and culture. As warriors aged, they became storytellers, spiritual guides, and mentors to the next generation of warriors. Their role in society shifted, but their impact was no less significant. The typical Viking warrior's life was marked by long periods away from home. Once a raid was complete and the warriors had gathered their spoils of war, whether gold, slaves, or other riches, they would make the long journey back to their villages. For many, this return was a time of reflection, reunion, and celebration. However, after the adrenaline of battle had faded, the true psychological weight of the raid began to settle in. For many Viking warriors, the return home was bittersweet. Though they were welcomed back as heroes, the emotional toll of what they had experienced during the raids was often heavy. Returning from a raid was a mixture of emotions. The warriors were no longer the young men who had set out on their first voyage. Years of fighting had taken their toll. The once clear distinction between victory and defeat began to blur. They had lived through the bloodshed, witnessed the deaths of friends, and felt the brutal consequences of their actions. The return home was a moment to reckon with the sacrifices they had made, not just on the battlefield, but in their own souls. A Viking warrior who had been away for months or even years might return to a community that had evolved in their absence. They would be welcomed by their families, honored by their peers, and celebrated for their courage. But the transition from fierce warrior to community member was not always an easy one. At home, there was work to be done. The warrior was no longer in the thick of battle, but his responsibilities had not diminished. He was still expected to provide for his family, to help with farming and crafting, and to guide the younger warriors who would follow in his footsteps. But the pressure of battle, of constantly fighting, of constantly living with the specter of death had its own toll. The older warriors were revered not just for their strength, but for their wisdom, their stories, and their guidance. As the Viking warrior grew older, he transitioned from the front lines of battle to becoming a mentor to the younger generation. The elder warriors were the keepers of knowledge, the storytellers who passed down the traditions, the skills, and the values of Viking society. They held a position of respect, not only as warriors, but as leaders within their communities. The stories of Viking warriors were passed down through oral tradition. The elder warriors became the custodians of the sagas, recounting their battles and victories to the younger warriors who would soon take their place. These stories weren't just for entertainments, they were lessons in bravery, leadership, and strategy. They taught the younger warriors the value of loyalty, the importance of sacrifice, and the sacred duty they had to their family and their gods. The Viking warrior's role as a mentor was a vital part of their legacy. By teaching the next generation, they ensured that their values and traditions would continue. But this responsibility was not just about passing down knowledge, it was about shaping the warriors of tomorrow. The older warriors would spend time training their sons and younger men, teaching them how to fight, how to lead, and how to carry the weight of their reputation. Though the older warriors were no longer physically as capable as they had been, in their youth, they were still respected for their experience and wisdom. They helped guide their communities during times of peace and war. As leaders, they acted as the keepers of Viking society's values, ensuring that the younger warriors understood the importance of honor, loyalty, and the connection to their gods. While the Viking warriors were known for their toughness and their ability to endure great physical hardship, there was also a psychological toll to their lifestyle. The violence of the raids, the bloodshed, the chaos, and the constant threat of death left deep scars. The psychological impact of war was not often discussed openly in Viking society. Warriors who had fought in numerous raids might have been hailed as heroes, but they also lived with the trauma of what they had experienced. The fear of death, the loss of friends, the carnage of battle, it all took its toll on the warrior's psyche. Vikings were often seen as fierce and unflinching, but many carried a quiet burden. They might have experienced flashbacks of battles, fought long ago, felt a deep sense of guilt for the lives they had taken, or been haunted by the screams of those they had left behind on the battlefield. For some, these psychological scars became part of their personal mythology. They didn't speak of their pain, but it was understood that it was there woven into the fabric of their identity. These warriors might retreat into themselves, finding solace in their family, their homes, or in solitude. They might become more reflective, retreating from the world of constant battle into the quieter rhythm of village life. But for others, this burden led them to seek redemption. Perhaps they would take on more leadership roles in their communities, striving to make up for past actions. Or perhaps they would seek to leave a greater legacy, one defined not just by violence, but by wisdom, peace, and protection. The Vikings' connection to their gods was central to their worldview, and it remained so throughout their lives. A Viking warrior's relationship with the gods shaped every decision they made, from the way they fought to the way they lived. The belief that they were serving the gods, gaining their favor, and preparing for an afterlife in Valhalla was a constant source of strength. Even in their later years, Viking warriors maintained their connection to the divine. They believed that their actions in life would determine their fate in the afterlife. The idea of Ragnarok, the final battle between the gods and the forces of chaos, was never far from their thoughts. The older warriors, having seen the horrors of war, might have seen themselves as preparing for the ultimate battle in Valhalla. Spiritual rituals, sacrifices, and offerings to the gods were performed to ensure that they would be remembered and honored in the afterlife. They might offer up a prayer to Odin, the Allfather, asking for strength, guidance, and protection. Thor, the god of thunder, was often invoked in times of war, while Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, represented a softer but equally important aspect of life. For the Viking warrior, faith and honor went hand in hand. A warrior who had fought bravely was believed to be favored by the gods, ensuring that his place in Valhalla was secure. Death was not feared, was embraced. For it was through battle and honor that a warrior would be chosen to join the gods. When a Viking warrior died, his legacy didn't end with his body. The Vikings believed that death was not an end, but a transformation. The fallen warrior's body was often burned on a ship, sending him off to Valhalla, where he would fight for eternity alongside other great warriors. this belief in the afterlife. And the honor of joining the gods was a powerful motivator for every Viking warrior. Death in battle, as brutal as it was, became a pathway to eternal glory. The death of a warrior was an event that resonated throughout the community. The funeral was not just a time of mourning, it was a celebration of the warrior's life. Feasts were held, songs were sung, and the warrior's accomplishments were recounted for all to hear. This was a time to remember the warrior's bravery, to honor their legacy, and to ensure that their name lived on in the sagas. The legacy of a Viking warrior was carried forward not just through the stories told about him, but through the children he left behind, the decisions he had made in life, and the actions he had taken. The life of a Viking warrior was one of incredible complexity. It was a life defined by physical strength, mental fortitude, and an unbreakable bond with the gods and the community. It was a life of exploration, raids, and endless struggle, but it was also a life of love, family, and wisdom. The legacy of a Viking warrior was not confined to their time on the battlefield, but was shaped by their connection to their community, their family, and the gods they worshipped. Even as they aged and moved away from battle, the impact of their life endured. The Viking warrior's name lived on in the sagas, in the stories passed down through generations. Their legacy was not just one of war, but one of leadership, mentorship, and honor. As we have journeyed through the life of the Viking warrior, from their humble beginnings as young apprentices to their rise as fierce and revered conquerors, we now look at the lasting impact they left on the world. Though the Viking Age lasted for only a few centuries, its influence stretched far beyond the shores of Scandinavia. From their raids and explorations to their interactions with other cultures, the Vikings left an indelible mark on history. But the legacy of a Viking warrior is not merely defined by the battlefields they fought on, the ships they sailed, or the villages they pillaged. Their true legacy is found in the cultural exchanges they initiated, the social structures they helped build, and the lasting impact they had on the development of the modern world. A Viking warrior was not just a soldier, he was a key member of the society that formed the backbone of Viking civilization. Viking society was structured around family, clan, and community. It was a hierarchical system where warriors held a respected place. But they were also deeply rooted in the land and in the relationships that formed the fabric of their communities. The society they built was one of cooperation and mutual support. Yet it was also one where strength, bravery, and loyalty determined one's status. At the top of Viking society stood the chieftains and king's leaders who commanded armies, made laws, and negotiated with foreign rulers. Below them were the warriors, who earned their place in society through their deeds on the battlefield and their contributions to the community. These warriors were not just the fighters, they were the keepers of tradition, the carriers of stories, and the enforcers of the laws. Viking warriors were expected to protect their families and villages, but they also had an obligation to maintain peace and stability within their communities. While raiding and war were essential parts of their lives, so too was trade, agriculture, and craftsmanship. A Viking warrior might spend part of his life as a farmer or a craftsman, forging weapons, building ships, or tending to livestock. The multifaceted nature of Viking society allowed them to be adaptable, resilient, and self-sufficient. Viking society was also deeply connected to their religion. The gods, such as Odin, Thor, and Freya, were central to their identity. The belief that they were chosen by the gods to fight and to die in battle gave the Vikings a sense of purpose and honor that was unmatched. Their belief in an afterlife, in Valhalla, where they would feast and fight for eternity, shaped every decision they made. Their devotion to their gods also inspired a strong sense of community and brotherhood. Among the warriors, the Vikings are often remembered for their raids, but they were much more than just raiders. They were traders, settlers, and explorers who had a profound impact on the course of European history. As they traveled through Europe, they came into contact with a variety of cultures, from the Anglo-Saxons in England to the Byzantines in Constantinople. Through their raids, the Vikings spread their influence across the continent. In England, the Viking invasions led to the establishment of the Danelaw area, where the Vikings controlled much of England. The Vikings left a lasting imprint on the culture, language, and legal systems of the region. The Anglo-Saxons and Vikings intermingled, resulting in a blending of traditions, customs, and languages that would influence the development of modern England. The Vikings also had a significant impact on the Franks, the Iberian Peninsula, and even the Mediterranean. Their mercenaries, known as the Varangians, played key roles in the Byzantine Empire, becoming the elite guard of the emperor. The Vikings not only fought in these regions, but also traded with them, bringing their goods, ideas, and technology. Through these interactions, the Vikings introduced new ideas about governance, warfare, and exploration to the cultures they encountered. But perhaps one of the most profound impacts the Vikings had on European history was through their exploration. The Vikings were the first Europeans to discover North America long before Columbus set sail. Led by Leif Erikson, the Vikings established a settlement in Vinland, in what is now Canada. Their voyages opened up new trade routes and set the stage for later European exploration of the New World, Viking. Warriors were among the first Europeans to travel across the Atlantic, connecting the Old World with the New. While their settlements in North America were short-lived, their voyages were pivotal in shaping the course of European exploration. The Vikings proved that it was possible to travel vast distances across the ocean and survive in distant lands. In addition to their raids and battles, the Vikings were skilled traders. The Viking warriors were not just fighters, they were also merchants who traveled the world in search of goods and resources. Their extensive trade network stretched from the British Isles to the Mediterranean, from the rivers of Russia to the markets of the Middle East. Viking traders were highly sought after, known for their ability to move goods efficiently across vast distances. They traded everything from furs and wool to weapons, glass, and even slaves. The Vikings played a key role in connecting distant regions and cultures, bringing together goods and ideas from across the known world. Their trade routes helped lay the foundation for the development of the medieval economy, which would later evolve into the bustling markets of Europe during the Middle Ages. Through their trade, the Vikings introduced new technologies and ideas to the regions they encountered. They brought advanced shipbuilding techniques, allowing other cultures to improve their own maritime capabilities. They also shared their knowledge of warfare, navigation, and agriculture, helping to shape the development of Europe in the centuries to come. The Vikings also introduced new forms of art, jewelry, and craftsmanship to the cultures they encountered. The Viking style, characterized by intricate patterns, animal motifs, and bold colors, influenced the design of weapons, armor, and everyday objects. Viking art and craftsmanship were highly regarded and traded widely, leaving a lasting mark on European culture. While the Vikings are often associated with raiding, they were also instrumental in the formation of modern Scandinavian states. As Viking warriors traveled, they established settlements and kingdoms, which eventually led to the unification of the Scandinavian countries. The Viking Age, while marked by violence and conquest, also laid the foundations for the nations of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. The Viking kingdoms were powerful and influential. They were organized into a system of chiefdoms where the warrior elite had control over land and resources. Over time, these chiefdoms were consolidated into larger kingdoms, with monarchs rising to power and uniting the people under a single banner. The Vikings' influence can still be seen in the political structures of modern Scandinavian countries. The establishment of kingdoms also marked the transition of Viking society from a warrior culture to a more settled, agrarian one. As the Viking warriors turned their attention to governance and diplomacy. Their raids began to decrease, and they shifted toward building stronger economies and societies. The Vikings' transformation from raiders to rulers was a defining moment in European history, as it marked the beginning of the medieval era. Beyond their political and economic impact, the Vikings' mythology and spiritual beliefs continue to influence modern culture. The gods of the Viking pantheon, Nadine, Thor, Freya, and others embodied ideals that continue to resonate with people today. Their stories have been passed down through sagas and poems, and they remain central to the Viking legacy. The Norse gods were not distant, untouchable beings. They were gods that walked among the people, interacting with them, guiding them, and inspiring them. These gods were fierce, brave, and wise qualities that Viking warriors aspired to embody. The connection between the gods and the warriors was one of mutual respect. The warriors fought to honor the gods, and in return, the gods promised them glory and honor in the afterlife. In modern times, Norse mythology continues to influence popular culture, from books and movies to video games and comic books. The characters of Thor, Loki, and Odin have been immortalized in films like Marvel's Thor and Avengers, bringing Viking mythology to a new generation. Viking sagas and stories continue to inspire writers, artists, and creators around the world. Today, the legacy of the Viking warrior can be seen everywhere, from the bustling streets of Scandinavian cities to the pages of modern literature, to the digital landscapes of gaming and entertainment. The image of the Viking warrior remains a powerful symbol of strength, courage, and resilience. Their reputation as fierce warriors who shaped the course of history is still celebrated, and their impact can be felt in every corner of the world. In Scandinavian countries, the Viking Age is a source of national pride. Every year, festivals are held to celebrate Viking heritage, where people gather to reenact battles, craft weapons, and tell stories of the past. These celebrations honor the warriors who once sailed the seas, explored new lands, and created a legacy that continues to inspire. The Vikings left behind more than just swords and shields. They left a culture, a story, and a way of life that continues to resonate with people today. Their spirit of exploration, their connection to their gods, and their fierce loyalty to their comrades live on through the stories they left behind. The Viking Age may have ended centuries ago, but the warriors who lived and died during that time continue to shape the world we live in. From the fields of battle to the halls of Valhalla, the Viking warrior spirit has transcended time, evolving into a symbol of strength, resilience, and courage. The legacies of these fierce, relentless warriors are woven into the fabric of modern culture, influencing everything from military strategy to literature, mythology, and entertainment. In this segment, we will explore how the Viking warriors' legacy has been reimagined and preserved through history, focusing on how their values and actions continue to inspire modern societies. We'll also examine the enduring myths and stories surrounding the Viking warriors, and how their lives and struggles have shaped our understanding of heroism, leadership, and community. From the battlefield to the movies, the impact of the Viking warrior continues to echo through time. The Viking warrior, often portrayed as a fearless and indomitable figure, has become a symbol of modern heroism. The very qualities that made them formidable on the battlefield, strength, courage, loyalty, and resilience, are qualities that are revered in contemporary cultures. But what makes a hero? And how did the Viking warrior's life and death contribute to the shaping of the modern understanding of heroism? In the Viking world, heroism was about more than just physical prowess. It was about honor, bravery, and loyalty to one's comrades and community. These qualities were reflected in the stories of legendary warriors like Ragnar Lothbrok, Bjorn Ironside, and Harald Hardrada, whose lives became the stuff of myth. These figures exemplified what it meant to be a true hero in the Viking traditions, someone who fought not just for personal glory, but for the glory of their people and the gods. Modern concepts of heroism are deeply influenced by these ideals. From comic books to action films, the Viking warrior's portrayal as a larger-than-life figure continues to shape our understanding of what it means to be heroic. The modern hero is often depicted as someone who is unyielding in the face of adversity, willing to face impossible odds for the greater good. Whether it's the stoic and battle-worn hero of medieval sagas or the fearless protagonists of modern media, the legacy of the Viking warrior lives on. The Viking warrior's courage was rooted in his belief in an afterlife, belief that dying honorably in battle would secure a place for him in Valhalla, where he would live forever among the gods. This idea of heroism tied to the afterlife has remained a powerful narrative, influencing modern stories about self-sacrifice, duty, and the pursuit of higher purpose. Heroes today are often defined by their willingness to face death with honor and to act for the greater good, themes that resonate strongly with the Viking spirit. The Viking warriors were not just fierce and brutal, they were also incredibly strategic. Their tactics in battle, their use of the longship for swift raids, and their ability to adapt to various forms of combat have been studied by military leaders for centuries. The Vikings' influence on modern military strategy is evident in their innovative techniques and their approach to warfare. One of the key elements of Viking warfare was the ability to strike quickly and efficiently. Vikings were masters of surprise attacks, often landing on enemy shores with little warning and overwhelming their targets with speed and precision. The use of the longship allowed the Vikings to travel swiftly across vast distances, attacking coastal villages before the defenders even had a chance to react. This strategy of rapid mobile warfare is something that has been adopted by modern military forces, particularly in naval operations. Another key element of Viking military strategy was the use of the shield wall. A Viking warrior's strength wasn't just in his individual prowess, but in his ability to fight as part of a cohesive unit. The shield wall was a formation where warriors stood close together, using their shields to form a nearly impenetrable barrier while they fought, with spears and axes. This technique of collective defense and offense is still used in modern armies, particularly in the formation of troops in tight-knit units during intense combat. The Vikings' focus on adaptability and surprise also laid the foundation for modern guerrilla warfare tactics, just as the Vikings could strike at a moment's notice. Modern armies employ similar strategies, relying on speed, surprise, and flexibility to outmaneuver their enemies. Beyond the battlefield, Viking warriors contributed to the development of military infrastructure and the technology of warfare. The Vikings were instrumental in the development of ships capable of traveling long distances across the seas, which later influenced naval strategies across Europe. The Viking longship, with its shallow draft and sleek design, revolutionized naval warfare. It allowed them to navigate rivers and coastlines with ease, setting the stage for future naval operations. Modern military history often refers back to Viking strategies, studying how their combination of fierce individual combat skills and highly organized tactical formations influenced later military developments. From Roman legionaries to modern special forces, the concept of strategic surprise, rapid deployment, and close combat still echoes the tactics pioneered by Viking warriors. Viking mythology continues to be one of the most captivating aspects of their culture, influencing not just their society, but also modern literature, art, and entertainment. The gods of the Viking pantheon, Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki, and others embody values and ideals that continue to resonate today. From strength and courage to wisdom and sacrifice, these gods shaped the way Vikings viewed the world and their place within it. At the heart of Viking mythology was the belief in the cycles of life and death, and the warrior's ultimate goal to be chosen by the gods to join them in Valhalla. The idea of fighting for something greater than oneself, of dying in battle to secure a place in an eternal afterlife, has a profound psychological and spiritual resonance. The Norse gods were not distant deities. They were seen as active participants in the lives of the Vikings, guiding them in battle, granting them strength, and rewarding them with honor. The Norse pantheon continues to inspire modern stories of heroism, sacrifice, and destiny. Thor, the god of thunder, has become one of the most iconic figures in modern popular culture. Appearing in comic books, films, and TV shows, such as Marvel's Thor and the Avengers. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and his battles against giants and monsters have been immortalized in modern media, serving as a symbol of strength and bravery. Odin, the Allfather, with his wisdom and cunning, has also had a lasting influence on modern stories of leadership and sacrifice. In both historical and modern contexts, Odin's portrayal as a god who sacrifices his own eye to gain wisdom resonates with contemporary notions of leaderships. MTs, sometimes. To lead, you must give up something valuable. Loki, the trickster god, embodies the complexity of human nature. He is a figure of mischief, deception, and ultimately, a force for change. His legacy lives on in modern depictions of anti-heroes and complex villains, characters who exist in the gray areas between good and evil. The reverence for these gods and the lessons they imparted about loyalty, sacrifice, and fate continues to influence modern storytelling. The Viking pantheon has inspired generations of writers, artists, and filmmakers, serving as the foundation for epic tales of adventure and moral conflict. The Viking warrior's image, shaped by the stories of their fearlessness and valor, has been reimagined and celebrated in modern times in ways that would have been unimaginable to the original warriors themselves. Their influence can be seen in films, television shows, literature, and even in the arts. The image of the Viking warrior with his flowing beard, fur-lined cloak, and battle axe has become synonymous with strength and courage. In Scandinavia, the Viking warrior has become a symbol of national pride. Modern festivals celebrate Viking heritage with reenactments of battles, the wearing of Viking garb, and the sharing of stories about their ancestors. In cities across Scandinavia, Viking museums and monuments stand as tributes to the warriors, who once roamed the seas and shaped the course of history. In these places, the Viking warrior is not just a symbol of violence, but of resilience, exploration, and a rich cultural heritage. Vikings have also made their mark in popular culture. From the long-running TV series Vikings to the countless video games, novels, and films that portray their adventures. These modern adaptations, while not always historically accurate, continue to reflect the fascination with the Viking way of life, their warrior spirit, their gods, and their journeys. The enduring legacy of the Viking warrior can also be found in the physical spaces they once occupied. Archaeological discoveries continue to shed light on their settlements, their ships, and their artifacts. These discoveries allow us to better understand how Vikings lived, fought, and understand how their cultures shaped the world they left behind. The Viking warrior's legacy is one that transcends time, geography, and culture. From their battles on the shores of England to their exploration of North America, their influence has endured for over 1,000 years. The values they held, dear courage, loyalty, honor, and sacrifice, continue to shape modern notions of heroism and leadership. The life of a Viking warrior was one of extremes. They lived and fought in a world where the line between life and death was razor thin. Yet, they not only survived, they thrived. The heart of the Viking warrior was not just found in their weapons or their conquests, but in their profound and often brutal worldview, which was rooted in their philosophy of life and death, fate and honor. To understand the Viking warrior, we must dive into their philosophy and psychology. How did they approach the world? What beliefs shaped their lives, their actions, and their interactions with others? What psychological resilience did they possess? And how did they navigate a world filled with constant danger and uncertainty? In this segment, we will explore the core values of the Viking warrior, examining their beliefs in fate and honor, their psychological strength, and how their mental toughness allowed them to navigate a world that was as violent as it too unpredictable. We will also explore how the Norse mythology, with its pantheon of gods and tales of heroism, shaped the way they viewed the world and how these beliefs drove them to greatness in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The Vikings lived in a world where fate was seen as an inescapable force, something that could neither be denied nor ignored. To the Viking warrior, fate was both a source of strength and a source of inevitability. Every battle, every decision, every moment of life was seen as part of a larger cosmic pattern. Fate was not something to fear, but something to accept and embrace. That this belief was grounded in the Norse concept of wyrda, word often translated as fate or destiny. The concept of wyrd suggested that the events of a person's life were interwoven with the lives of others, and that each individual's journey was shaped by forces beyond their control. The Viking warrior knew that his fate had already been written, and that his death could come at any moment. This understanding of fate imbued the Viking warrior with a unique sense of urgency and purpose. They were not waiting for something to happen. They were living out their destiny. But honor was just as important as fate. To the Viking warrior, honor was the core of their being. The desire to die in battle with honor, to be remembered in song and story, was a driving force in everything they did. This obsession with honor shaped their actions in battle and in life. A warrior who showed cowardice or dishonored himself or his comrades could face social exile or worse, eternal shame. The pressure to uphold honor could be a heavy burden, but it also fueled their resilience. Honor in the Viking world wasn't just about personal reputation. It was about duty to the tribe, to the gods, and to the memory of their ancestors. The warrior was not just an individual, he was part of a greater lineage, a lineage defined by its warriors, its gods, and its victories. The loss of honor was a fate worse than death for a Viking. Death in battle, however, was seen as the highest form of honor. In the Viking world, war was not something to fear. It was something to embrace. Death on the battlefield was considered the ultimate glory, a key to the afterlife. To be chosen by Odin, the Allfather, to enter Valhalla after dying in battle was the greatest honor a Viking could achieve. The warrior knew that his time on this earth was limited, but that if he lived with honor, his name would live on for eternity. But beyond the physical strength and bravery, 'twas the psychological resilience of the Viking warrior that truly set him apart. The ability to endure hardship, to stay focused amidst chaos, and to withstand the emotional toll of battle and death were vital qualities of the Viking warrior. The Vikings, as a people, were deeply connected to the harsh landscape they inhabited. The constant struggle to survive in the cold, unforgiving climates of Scandinavia required mental toughness from a young age. Viking children were taught early on that life was a battle both against the elements and against their enemies. Physical endurance was a key part of Viking training, but psychological endurance was just as important. A Viking warrior needed to be able to cope with the stress and trauma of battle without breaking down. The Vikings didn't just fight external enemies, they fought internal battles as well. Many of them had to wrestle with fear, guilt, and loss. The act of taking another man's life, of witnessing the death of comrades, and of confronting the specter of one's own mortality was a heavy psychological burden. Yet, the Vikings were trained to suppress their emotions and to focus on the task at hand. Their mental resilience was grounded in the belief that their actions were divinely ordained. The knowledge that their gods were watching over them, that their fate was already written, gave them the strength to continue forward, even in the face of death. However, this resilience came at a cost. The constant pressure to be brave, to live up to the ideals of honor and strength took a toll on the psyche of the Viking warrior. The emotional scars of battle were often carried in silence, buried beneath the veneer of strength and bravery. But the emotional toll was real. The psychological aftermath of raids and battles would have been profound, particularly for those who survived. While the Viking warrior might have been celebrated as a hero, the trauma of battle and loss stayed with him, perhaps for the rest of his life. The Vikings did not have a term for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, but their sagas are filled with stories of warriors who struggled with their own psychological demons. These warriors might have sought solace in the rituals and spiritual practices of their faith, turning to the gods for guidance and strength. The psychological endurance required to be a Viking warrior was just as important as the physical strength they displayed in battle. Viking warriors were not just trained in physical combat. They were trained to endure mental hardship as well. The Vikings believed that the mind and the body were inseparable. Physical training was vital, but so was the ability to control one's thoughts, emotions, and impulses. Vikings trained for mental toughness through a combination of physical endurance, spiritual practices, and communal rituals. The physical hardships of living in such a harsh environment prepared them for the brutal realities of battle. In addition to this, the Vikings also had to confront the mental strain of being part of a war-driven culture. The process of raiding, fighting, and winning or losing was an experience that shaped the Viking warrior's psyche. The chaos of battle demanded that warriors learn how to compartmentalize their emotions, how to focus on survival rather than the horror of war. They learned how to push aside fear and doubt in order to focus on the task at hand, victory beyond battle. The Vikings were also trained to deal with emotional hardships during the long winters, when raids and exploration were not possible. The isolation and hardship of the cold, dark months of winter demanded a kind of psychological resilience. It was a time for contemplation and storytelling, a time to reflect on the past year and prepare for the future. The Viking warrior knew that mental resilience wasn't just about surviving one battle, it was about surviving a lifetime of battles. The endurance to push through hardship, to continue fighting even when all seemed lost, was a key part of the Viking spirit. The psychology of the Viking warrior was deeply influenced by the mythology they held dear. Norse mythology, with its tales of gods, heroes, and monsters, shaped how they viewed the world and their place within it. The Norse gods were not distant figures. They were active participants in the lives of the warriors. Odin, the Allfather, was the god of wisdom, war, and death. He represented the ideal of the wise, yet fierce, warrior. His pursuit of knowledge, even at the cost of his own eye, embodied the idea that knowledge and sacrifice were inseparable. Thor, the god of thunder, represented the raw power and strength of the warrior. He was the protector, the one who fought for the survival of his people. Freya, the goddess of love and fertility, symbolized the balance of strength and compassion, representing the vital connection between warriors and their families. These gods were not just revered, they were actively invoked in times of war. When the Vikings needed strength, guidance, and protection, the psychological connection to these gods helped shape the way Viking warriors approached battle and death. The belief that they were fighting not just for themselves, but for the favor of the gods, made their struggles feel divinely justified. Their battles were seen as part of a larger cosmic struggle between good and evil, light and dark. This understanding of their role in the world helped the Viking warrior face challenges that would have broken most men, their belief in the afterlife, particularly the idea of Valhalla, where they would join their fellow warriors and feast for eternity. Gave them the courage to face death without fear. Ragnarok, the end of the world and the final battle between the gods and the forces of chaos, was a fate every Viking warrior was ready to face. It was not a death to be feared, but an end that every Viking warrior was destined to meet. This belief in an eternal afterlife gave the Viking warriors a sense of purpose that transcended their time on Earth. The Viking warriors' journey didn't end with their death or the fall of the Viking Age. The legacy they left behind has transcended the centuries, evolving into something greater than the sum of its parts. The Viking warriors' impact reverberates through the modern world, not just in Scandinavia, but across Europe, North America, and beyond. Their stories, their conquests, and their values continue to shape our cultures, societies, and imaginations. In this segment, we explore the lasting cultural legacy of the Viking warrior, examining how their influence has been preserved, mythologized, and reinterpreted through the centuries. From the Viking warriors' contribution to modern government systems and languages to their resurgence in popular culture, the Vikings have cemented their place in the collective imagination as symbols of strength, resilience, and freedom. The Viking Age was not only a time of exploration and conquest. It was also a time of political innovation. While many people associate the Vikings with chaos and destruction, their contributions to governmental structures and laws were profound. The Viking warrior helped shape the foundations of modern European governance through the creation of complex tribal councils and the establishment of legal codes that influenced future democratic systems. One of the most important contributions the Vikings made to governance was the development of the Thing, form of assembly and judicial system that allowed free men to come together and settle disputes. The Althing, established in Iceland around the 10th century, is considered one of the oldest continuous parliaments in the world. It was not just a place for Viking warriors to settle their differences, but also a venue for creating laws and ensuring that justice was carried out. The Vikings' legal system was based on common law, with judges and lawmakers who were elected by the people to resolve disputes and oversee the community. In many ways, the Viking Thing laid the foundation for modern democratic principles, such as the idea of representation and collective decision-making. The Viking warrior, although known for his prowess in battle, was also deeply involved in the formation of laws and codes that would govern his people. The Vikings believed that justice was not just a matter of strength, but of fairness, and they developed systems to ensure that the voice of the people was heard. The Viking system of governance was also deeply influenced by their spirituality and their sense of honor. The Vikings believed that their laws were directly connected to their gods. Their warriors, while fierce in battle, were also bound by a sense of duty to uphold justice and righteousness in their communities. The Viking system of governance not only established order in their society, but it also created a deep sense of responsibility among the warriors who enforced the laws. The Viking warriors didn't just shape the future of governance. They also left a lasting impact on the languages and cultures of the regions they encountered. Their language-old Norse influenced the development of many modern languages, particularly those spoken in Scandinavia, the United Kingdom, and parts of Northern Europe. The Vikings' invasions and settlements in England led to the creation of the Dana, a region where Old Norse was spoken alongside Old English. This linguistic overlap left a lasting mark on the English language, particularly in its vocabulary. Many English words, such as sky, window, knife, and husband, are derived from Old Norse, illustrating the profound influence of the Vikings on modern English. The Vikings were also responsible for spreading their culture and ideas through their exploration of the North Atlantic. As they settled in Iceland, Greenland, and Newfoundland, they brought with them their customs, beliefs, and language, which helped shape the cultural identity of these regions. Viking sagas and stories were passed down through generations in Iceland, forming the basis for much of the country's literary tradition. In addition to linguistic contributions, the Vikings had a lasting impact on art, craftsmanship, and architecture. Viking art, with its intricate designs, animal motifs, and geometric patterns, has influenced everything from modern jewelry to tattoo designs. The distinctive Viking longship, with its sleek lines and functional design, continues to inspire modern shipbuilding techniques. The Viking warrior's story did not end with their death or the fading of the Viking Age. Instead, the legacy of these fierce warriors has been mythologized and reinterpreted in countless ways throughout history, particularly through literature, art, popular culture. The Viking warrior has been a subject of fascination for centuries. In the Middle Ages, the Viking sagas immortalized the tales of legendary warriors and their deeds. These stories, passed down through generations, preserved the spirit of the Viking Age and inspired new generations to look back on the Vikings with awe and reverence. However, it wasn't until the 19th century that the Viking warrior became a central figure in European and Western literature. Writers like Wagner and Haggard romanticized the Viking warrior as a symbol of strength, independence, and freedom. The image of the Viking as a noble barbarian emerged, emphasizing their heroism, their connection to the gods, and their place in the grand narrative of European history. In modern times, the Viking warrior has become an icon of popular culture. From Hollywood films and TV shows like Vikings and Thor 2, video games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the Viking warrior continues to captivate audiences. The modern portrayal of the Viking warrior often emphasizes their brutal strength, their fearlessness in battle, and their connection to their gods, making them larger-than-life figures in the eyes of audiences. But the Viking warrior story is not just about battle and conquest. Our portrayals have also sought to humanize the Vikings, depicting them as complex individuals with personal struggles, love for their families, and a deep sense of loyalty to their comrades. The image of the Viking warrior in contemporary media has evolved from the stereotype of a savage barbarian to that of a tragic hero, someone who faces overwhelming odds but continues to fight for what he believes in. While the Viking warrior's legacy has been immortalized in stories and entertainment, it has also been brought to life through historical reenactments and Viking festivals. These events allow modern people to experience Viking life firsthand, celebrating the warrior spirit and honoring the culture that gave birth to the legendary Vikings in Scandinavia. Viking festivals are held throughout the year to celebrate Viking heritage. These festivals often feature reenactments of famous battles, ship launches, and Viking rituals. Participants dress in authentic Viking clothing, recreate ancient weapons and tools, and perform traditional Viking crafts. These festivals serve as both educational experiences and cultural celebrations, allowing people to connect with their Viking ancestors and learn about their history. One of the largest Viking festivals takes place annually in Norway and Denmark, attracting visitors from all over the world. These events often include sword fights, archery competitions, and Viking feasts, giving people a taste of what life was like during the Viking Age. In addition to reenactments, Viking festivals also feature storytelling, where sagas are recited, and the history of the Vikings is brought to life. Viking reenactments have also become popular in North America, particularly in regions with large Scandinavian American populations. These reenactments allow modern audiences to experience Viking culture in an immersive way, often with authentic Viking longships and recreated Viking settlements. These events continue to fuel the fascination with Viking history, allowing people to engage with the past in a meaningful way. The Viking warrior continues to be an important part of modern identity, particularly in Scandinavia. National pride in Viking heritage is woven into the cultural fabric of countries like Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. The Vikings are seen not just as historical figures, but as symbols of the strength, resilience, and independence that continue to define these nations in recent years. Viking imagery has been embraced by popular culture, appearing in everything From sports teams' mascots to tattoos to national branding. The Viking warrior's image as a brave and free spirit has become synonymous with Scandinavian pride. National museums, historical societies, and even tourist industries in Scandinavia have embraced the Viking legacy, offering exhibits, interactive displays, and cultural experiences to bring Viking history to life for people of all ages. The Viking warrior's legacy continues to endure across the centuries, transcending history, myth, and modern culture. From their impact on the development of European governance and language to their profound influence on popular culture and national identity, the Vikings have left an indelible mark on the world. As we look back on the lives of these formidable warriors, we see not just conquerors and raiders, but heroes, leaders, and trailblazers, whose values and actions have shaped the course of history. The Viking warrior's legacy lives on, not just in the past, but in the present, to will continue to inspire future generations for years to come. As the centuries have passed since the fall of the Viking Age, the figure of the Viking warrior has evolved, changing from a brutal raider to a revered hero, then to a symbol of national pride and even global admiration. Their legacy is as complex as their history itself, and this transformation is a story of both historical revision and cultural adaptation. The Viking warrior, once feared and demonized for their raids and conquests, has become a global symbol of strength, freedom, and individualism. But how did this transformation occur? How did the Viking warrior's image evolve from a historical figure defined by violence and conquest to an icon that is celebrated across cultures and generations? In this segment, we explore the evolution of the Viking warrior from the historical figure to the hero of modern-day pop culture. We will examine how perceptions of the Vikings have shifted through the centuries, how modern reinterpretations of their culture have occurred, and how they continue to inspire global movements, artistic expressions, and national pride. The Vikings were first described by their enemies as brutal, barbaric, and savage. Their raids, which began in the 8th century and continued for several hundred years, left a trail of destruction across Europe. Monasteries were sacked, villages burned to the ground, and countless lives were lost. For centuries, the Vikings were regarded as little more than plundering pirates, fearsome warriors who spread terror throughout the known world. However, over time, this image of the Viking warrior has undergone a significant shift. The Vikings, once feared for their brutality, are now seen in a far more nuanced light. The 19th and 20th centuries saw a surge in romanticized portrayals of Viking warriors. These depictions painted them as noble, honor-driven figures, often heroic, brave, and even tragic in the 19th century. The Viking Age was mythologized as a time of noble conquest and adventure. The romanticism of the Vikings as heroes of freedom resonated with rising nationalistic sentiments in Scandinavia. Writers and artists of the period, such as Richard Wagner with his opera Der Ring des Nibelungen, reimagined the Viking warriors as noble figures worthy of admiration and respect. This idealized image played a major role in the shaping of modern Scandinavian national identities. This newfound respect for the Viking warriors continued into the 20th century, where the portrayal of Vikings as strong, independent heroes began to gain more mainstream traction. They were seen as pioneers, explorers, and trailblazers, figures who broke from convention and embraced adventure. The pop culture phenomenon of the Vikings is evident in modern films, television shows, books, and video games. Characters like Thor, Loki, and Ragnar Lothbrok have become cultural icons, representing strength, rebellion, and the complex mix of myth and reality that defines the Viking spirit. The Viking warrior, once demonized, has now become an archetype for the indomitable spirit. It's admired for their courage, loyalty, and leadership. In contemporary popular culture, Viking warriors have become symbols of freedom, adventure, and heroism. From movies like Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to the hit television series Vikings, the image of the Viking warrior is now synonymous with valor, self-determination, and a connection to a deeper spiritual code, the Marvel Comics character. Thor, the Norse god of thunder, has become one of the most recognizable Viking-related figures in the world today. Thor's journey as a protector of Midgard Earth has been immortalized through comic books, movies, and television series. He embodies the fierce warrior spirit of the Viking Age, wielding the mighty Mjolnir and fighting to uphold justice. Through Thor, the Viking warrior's legacy is tied to themes of protection, loyalty, and sacrifice, which resonate deeply with modern audiences. Television series like Vikings, which chronicles the life of the legendary Norse hero Ragnar Lothbrok, have further solidified the image of the Viking warrior as a complicated and heroic figure. Ragnar, portrayed as a deeply flawed yet noble leader, reflects the complex nature of the Viking warrior. He is driven by ambition, but also by family loyalty and a desire for glory. The show portrays Viking warriors not as mindless destroyers, but as visionaries and leaders who sought to shape the world through both their warrior spirit and strategic thinking. The rise of the Viking in popular media has contributed to a revival of interest in Viking culture and history. Film, literature, and video games continue to reimagine Viking warriors as symbols of strength, resilience, and independence, and have helped revive interest in Viking history in ways that were once unimaginable. From Assassin's Creed Valhalla to God of War, video games have allowed players to embody the Viking spirit, to fight battles, and to experience life through the eyes of a warrior. This modern mythologization of the Viking warrior has shaped not only the way we view these ancient people, but has also inspired a broader cultural movement that ties back to the Viking spirit, a celebration of personal strength, exploration, and freedom. Through gaming, literature, and film, the Viking warrior continues to resonate with modern ideals. From overcoming adversity to creating one's destiny, the cultural significance of the Viking warrior has not only been preserved through reenactments and Viking festivals. These festivals, held primarily in Scandinavia, but also in other parts of the world, celebrate the Viking heritage, bringing people together to immerse themselves in the world of Viking warriors. Viking festivals are not only about history, they are a way of honoring the spirit of the Viking warrior. These events often feature reenactments of Viking battles, demonstrations of traditional Viking skills like sword fighting, archery, and shipbuilding, and opportunities for people to dress in Viking-inspired clothing. The festivals create an immersive experience where people can witness Viking warriors in action, connect with Viking culture, and learn about the complex history of these legendary figures. In addition to these festivals, many communities host Viking reenactment groups, where individuals participate in carefully staged battles and social gatherings, often dressed in historically accurate costumes and armor. These reenactments not only allow people to learn about Viking history, but they also serve to keep the warrior spirit alive, enacting the bravery, craftsmanship, and values of the Viking warriors. One of the largest reenactments takes place annually in Lofoten, Norway, where Viking battles are reenacted with authenticity and flair. Participants in these events often spend months preparing their armor, weapons, and costumes. For many, these reenactments are more than just a historical exercise. They are a way to connect with their Viking ancestry, to honor their warrior forebears, and to keep the Viking tradition alive for future generations. The combat techniques of the Viking warriors continue to influence modern warfare. While the weapons and technology of today may have changed, the strategies used by Viking warriors can still be seen in modern military tactics. The use of surprise attacks, flanking maneuvers, and shock tactics were integral parts of Viking strategy, and these concepts have influenced military leaders and strategies throughout history. Viking warriors also excelled at sea warfare, using Their iconic longships to strike at coastal towns and settlements with incredible speed and agility. These naval tactics have influenced modern naval operations, where speed and surprise continue to play critical roles in military engagements. Viking warriors were also known for their resilience and their ability to fight in adverse conditions. Their training and ability to endure hardship from long campaigns to harsh winters were qualities that were passed down through generations. These same qualities are often emphasized in modern military training, where soldiers are taught to withstand physical and mental hardships in preparation for battle. The Viking warrior's legacy is not confined to the pages of history. It lives on in modern culture, literature, entertainment, and even military strategy. From the romanticized portrayals in movies and television shows to the real-world reenactments and Viking festivals, the warrior spirit continues to inspire. Us, the Vikings, were not just conquerors. They were explorers, innovators, and survivors. The legacy of the Viking warrior is a story of strength, honor, sacrifice, and freedom. It is a legacy that has endured for centuries and will continue to inspire generations to come. The Viking warriors' influence extends far beyond the shores of Scandinavia or the battles they fought. Their legacy is intricately woven into the fabric of the world, influencing modern leadership practices, community building, sports culture, and the pursuit of personal meaning in today's fast-paced world. From ancient rituals to contemporary inspirations, the Viking warrior represents more than just a relic of history. They are a symbol of values that resonate deeply with us: honor, loyalty, courage, and self-sacrifice. In this segment, we'll explore how the Viking warriors' principles were not just limited to warfare. They are embedded in the foundational structures of modern society, how their leadership, courageous resolve, and sense of community continue to shape leaders, entrepreneurs, and athletes. The Viking warrior's warrior code influences not just our ideas of heroism, but our everyday practices of justice, integrity, and teamwork. At the heart of Viking society was the idea of leadership, both in battle and in community. The Viking warrior was not just a solitary figure. They were a leader, guiding their comrades in battle, ensuring their community's survival, and upholding the values of honor and loyalty that defined their way of life. Viking warriors weren't just trained to fight, they were trained to lead, to inspire others, and to serve as moral guides for their people. Leadership in the Viking world wasn't about being the strongest or the most fearsome fighter. It was about earning respect through action. A leader was someone who demonstrated wisdom, strategic thinking, and the ability to make tough decisions, often under pressure. These warriors did not simply give commands, they lived by example, showing courage in the face of death, loyalty to their comrades, and an unyielding desire to uphold their honor and reputation. In a society where the line between life and death was razor thin, the ability to lead effectively was of the utmost importance. The Viking warrior was expected to embody the very values they held dear. Their honor was not just a matter of personal pride, it was the glue that held the tribe together. A leader who failed to uphold honor would lose the respect of his followers and risk the collapse of the tribe itself. The notion of honor was central to their leadership. It wasn't just about winning battles, it was about conducting oneself with integrity, loyalty, and respect for the rules of their society. Viking warriors who showed honor on the battlefield were respected not only for their fighting skills, but for their character. This concept of leadership would resonate throughout history, influencing both military commanders and political figures. From the battlefields of Europe to the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, Viking principles of leadership have shaped how we view authority, decision-making, and moral integrity. The Viking warriors' code was a set of values that governed not just their actions in battle, but their entire way of life. At the heart of this code were the principles of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice, values that went far beyond mere survival. They shaped the Viking warrior's identity and defined their place within the tribe. A Viking warrior's loyalty was to his comrades, his family, and his tribe. Loyalty was paramount in Viking society. To betray one's own people was to dishonor, not just oneself, but the entire community. Warriors were expected to show unwavering loyalty to their chieftain and their fellow soldiers. The bonds forged in battle, bonds of trust and brotherhood, were sacred. A Viking's loyalty was also tied to their commitment to the greater good. The warrior did not fight just for personal gain or glory, but for the survival and prosperity of his people. This idea of collective responsibility has been passed down through generations, influencing not only military strategy, but also modern teamwork and community building practices. In today's world, the principles of loyalty to the group, shared responsibility for collective success, and the idea that sacrifice for the greater good is worth pursuing are crucial to many corporations, teams, and social movements. Sacrifice was another core value of the Viking warrior. They did not shy away from the idea of self-sacrifice. Giving everything for the greater cause was a central part of their identity. This willingness to risk everything for the tribe, the gods, and the future of their people influenced future generations of leaders and warriors. In the world of modern sports, business, and military life, the Viking warrior's code of sacrifice has been reincarnated as a commitment to hard work, dedication, and team success. Viking principles of leadership and honor continue to be applied in modern contexts. Whether in business, the military, or community building, the values embraced by Viking warriors have found a home in modern-day leadership philosophies. The leadership skills developed by Viking warriors are still regarded as essential by today's leaders, especially in challenging situations where strength, integrity, and loyalty are put to the test. For instance, in military leadership, the Viking emphasis on strategic thinking, adaptability, and loyalty to the troops continues to be taught in modern military academies. The leadership principles exemplified by figures like Ragnar, Lothbrok, and Harald Hardrada are studied for their ability to lead through adversity and to inspire troops to fight not just for victory, but for a shared cause. In the business world, Viking leadership traits such as decisiveness, resilience, and visionary thinking have been adopted by corporate leaders seeking to create strong, loyal teams. Like the Viking warrior, modern leaders must balance the needs of their people with the pursuit of victory, all while maintaining their honor and integrity. These principles help leaders foster strong relationships with their teams, manage crises, and maintain the focus needed to achieve success. The Viking warrior spirit can be seen in the world of sports, where principles of bravery, teamwork, and resilience are paramount. Just as the Vikings fought alongside their comrades in battle, modern athletes rely on teamwork and loyalty to achieve their goals. The team-oriented mentality of the Viking warrior is mirrored in the competitive spirit of modern sports teams. The concept of strength in numbers, how a group of warriors could fight as a unified force, can be seen in sports like football, rugby, soccer, and hockey. Like the Viking warriors, modern athletes must trust their teammates, work together to execute strategies, and sacrifice individual glory for the collective success of the team. Furthermore, individual sports like boxing, MMA, and triathlons embody the Viking warrior's personal bravery and mental resilience. The idea of conquering fear, pushing through physical pain, and fighting for a personal sense of glory is deeply rooted in the warrior spirit that Viking warriors embodied. Sports coaches, too, embody Viking leadership principles. They lead teams through adversity, develop strategies, and inspire athletes to give everything they have to achieve success. Much like the Viking warriors who led their troops into battle with unwavering resolve. In addition to their impact on leadership and sports, the values embraced by the Viking warriors have resonated with individuals seeking to create meaning in their own lives. in a world that often feels uncertain and fragmented. The Viking warrior's pursuit of honor, freedom, and purpose provides a timeless example of living a life. Driven by values and principles, the Viking warriors focus on personal growth. Their commitment to a life of honor and their understanding that each individual has a role to play in the world have inspired contemporary thinkers, philosophers, and self-help movements. Today, people continue to seek inspiration from Viking culture, particularly the idea that life is a journey of self-discovery, where individuals must learn to face challenges head-on, never losing sight of their core values. This search for meaning and purpose mirrors the Viking warrior's journey. Just as Vikings believed that their lives had meaning through their connection to the gods and their role in battle, modern individuals often turn to personal rituals, self-discipline, and purposeful action as a means of navigating the complexities of life. The honor-bound code of the Viking warrior continues to provide a philosophical foundation for those seeking to live a life of purpose, driven by values like courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. Whether in the context of personal growth, professional success, or building meaningful relationships, the Viking warrior's values continue to serve as a guiding light. The Viking warrior's legacy is much more than a relic of the past. It lives on in the leadership principles, sports culture, and personal philosophies that guide modern society. From their commitment to honor, loyalty, and sacrifice, to their fearless approach to life and death, the Viking warrior embodies ideals that continue to inspire generations. The values they embraced: bravery, resilience, sacrifice, and honor, not just part of a distant history. They are timeless qualities that resonate with people today. The Viking warrior spirit lives on in the hearts of modern leaders, athletes, and individuals who seek meaning, purpose, and strength in their lives. The Viking warrior's legacy is eternal, not because of their conquests, but because of the timeless values they upheld and passed on through their deeds, their culture, and their example.